Today I want to share a handful of things I do for maintenance on my 3D printer for a monthly basis. Now these things are simple, but they can really ensure that your printer is running smoothly, efficiently, and effectively, all while proactively preventing issues in the future. So let's begin. So the very first thing we're going to do makes sense. You're probably doing it already. Is clean the entire workspace. So look underneath these belts. Look underneath the bed. Underneath the printer. Look in all these grooves. We often have filaments or dust, different particles that they could get into the fan. They cause all type of problems. So clean those at least, ideally more than monthly. But if you don't do it, kind of like me, do that at least on a monthly basis. If you have any of these filament traps, you can clear those too. If I could get mine off. So see, I've got some filament in there. Clean that. Simply, I use a rag, clean it up, and then certainly for these grooves underneath the belt, all of those, I just use a vacuum cleaner, and that cleans everything up. So next thing I do is look at the linear guides. So these are very important. They allow our movements for our motors to go up very easily without restriction. And one thing, I don't clean this often, but on a monthly basis you really should. So on the top here, you're not gonna, it may be difficult to see anyhow. Rarely are we printing something that is this high. So normally up top is pretty clean, but down low, potentially if you could see that, it's really dirty. There's a lot of grime in there. Here, if I take my finger, I mean, you can even see right there just a little bit, I have grime and grease on my finger. And so on a monthly basis, this is something I always try to do because it really could make an impact on your 3D print. Now, here, I'm not going to say this is what you should use, and I'm probably going to get blasted for saying what I use. Look at your specs for your 3D printer. They'll suggest what to use. I personally just use this bike chain. It cleans, lubricates. I also use it for my actual bike. I get it at Walmart. It's pretty dang cheap. And you'll be amazed, just that little bit, look how much has come off in that one area. So what I do is I never spray directly onto the rod. I don't want this to seep through or get into the electronics. So I put this on just an old shirt or a rag. You're okay with it being absolutely destroyed. And then I carefully try to go the whole length up and down here. Take your time, get rid of a lot of that. That's going to help lubricate and again ensure that your motors are going to be able to move without hesitation and lead to some good prints. But this is one thing I don't think many people do, and I think makes a big difference and something I've been doing for a long time and I've always been happy with the results. And honestly, on a monthly basis, I'm amazed how much dirt and grime gets on there. It's a closed environment. It's pretty clean, I would argue, and yet we still get all of this grime. So check that, and we'll move to the next. Next thing I do is I really want to look at my belts. So we have our belts here on the bottom that will move our bed in and out. And as I actually move this and I look at the entire belt, at least as much as I can, you're really looking for imperfections. Are there any dirt, hair? Do you start to see rips? Has it started to dry rot? And that will give you a clue. Obviously, you're going to need to replace that soon. But not only that, but you want to see how tight is this. So here, I'm pretty tight. I'm happy with that. You'll learn with experience how tight those should be. You don't want it over tight, but certainly you don't want it loose either. And those something you can correct, whether you're using an Ender 3, whether you're using a Sovol right here, whatever printer you have, you can tighten these. So check that. We also have some that help the motors to go left and right. And again, move the actual motors. And that way you can see all of the belts. And again, I'm looking just for imperfections. I'm looking for any dirt. Feel free to clean that. Be careful. You don't want to snap it. You don't want to add any water or cleaning solution on those. I use a dry rag and just ensure they're clean. They look okay. These on the top I can see maybe are a little dirty, but they're not. They don't see any really flaws. So I would be okay with those, but certainly check them. They may need repair. May need just a little cleaned up or tuned, as I mentioned before, making them a little tighter or looser if need be. Then, of course, you want to look at your 3D printing bed. So I left some stuff on here so we can see, but get good lighting. Really look at your bed. Now, it may be glass, maybe this bendy stuff, whatever it may be. Look to be sure it's free of debris. So, for example, that's etched in. This was part of a print that you saw earlier that I just left on. But now here, and it may be difficult to see here in the video, I don't know, but there's some like residue of a previous print that had probably stuck a little too well to the bed. Now that isn't intended to be there. That is an actual mistake that I don't want there. So on a monthly basis, I go in and I really be sure that I get as much of the leftover filament off there as possible. You also want to look, I mean, this one, the actual integrity of the material looks okay, but I've had them where they start coming apart. If you have a glass bed, you're going to want to look for cracks. You're going to want to look for any flaws that could ultimately, during a print, fail, and your entire print could be ruined, which may or may not be a big deal depending on what you're printing, but that could obviously cause a concern and cause a mess if your glass bed cracks or shatters and now you have glass everywhere. So definitely look at your printing bed, and then we're going to go to a couple other more practical things as well. Now, one of the things I actually don't enjoy doing is messing with firmware, but it's something you do need to check if you start seeing performance degrade. Check firmware. There's a lot of changes that those can ensure your printer keeping up with the recent slicers and just ultimately performing well. So you can go to printer info, and then you've got your firmware version. You can go online, see if there's an update. Everyone is a little different, right? And how you check this and how you upload new firmware. Ender 3s are simple. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory nowadays, but you definitely want to check that firmware, see if there's an update for you. Another thing that's imperative is to check your 3D printing nozzles. So a couple I have here are just really worn. Now they still work, however, I may not get the highest quality print. You can see there's filament all over them, they've been used, can be some degradation because they're rubbing against the printing bed. In this case, regardless of what the reason may be, you either one can clean these, or you can simply replace these. So on Amazon, on eBay, anywhere you look, you can find nozzles really cheap. Different nozzle sizes, different materials. They're pretty cheap, and so you can simply replace them. Also, if you purchase a 3D printer or even have a little toolkit, you're more likely going to have one of these needles. So what you can do with these is simply heat up the nozzle in your 3D printer, and then you can push this needle through that nozzle, and it's going to kind of release and open up some of that leftover filament that's in there that may be causing a clog, a partial clog, or just inefficiency with someone 3D printing. So this is obviously a very important part of the 3D print. If everything's calibrated perfectly, but your nozzle is trash, you're going to get a poor 3D print. So check all of your nozzles and replace when needed. All right, then the last step, I want to recalibrate. Not quite everything. I don't go nuts, but I certainly re-level my bed, verify that in this case both of my motors and for each of those nozzles they are calibrated correctly, the offset, things of that nature. And typically you want to do this last, because if you're cleaning or you're taking apart any of the mechanical parts, you want to do all of that first and then level your bed. Obviously you level your bed first. You change something with maybe one of the bands and you make those a little tighter. You go back, you don't know how that's going to affect your 3D print, so you're going to have to calibrate and level everything again. So do this at the very last step. But once you've done that, you're ready to 3D print again. I think some of these things will really just help keep your 3D printer in tip-top shape, ensure that you're taking care of the preventative maintenance, and no little issues will become bigger issues that are going to ultimately damage your 3D printer or even fail in longer prints. So if you have any questions, comment below. I would love to know what you do on a monthly basis too. There are a lot of answers, going from I don't do anything on a monthly basis to, hey, I do these extra things. So let us know. It'd be good to learn from each other. Thank you for watching. Happy printing.